you will remain aware of everything that goes on.
Okay.
We're going to find an incident in your life you have an exact record of. Then, by sending you through it at the time it happened, we're going to reduce it. We will reduce the pain. Go to the beginning of that incident. Tell me what's happening.
Well, these things get also
joined in.
and a bunch of young kids like I was young.
We were all very heated, very excited about this.
Can you recall a time when you were happy?
I think the first time I saw Habit and I was in awe.
You did because you thought you were doing good. I mean, so you had some gratification.
Oh, I felt a tremendous amount of relief.
I've got the answers for everything within the religion.
What are you most afraid of?
It was dark.
3 in the morning, there's a knock on the hotel room door.
Stop. I'll say whatever you want. I'll write up anything.
I flipped out. I mean, I started punching holes in the walls.
Things didn't seem quite right.
And you just feel so foolish at that point.
Do you have a secret you're afraid I will find out?
Yes.
Yes.
Go to the beginning of that incident.
Okay, all right.
Tell me about it.
I was 21 years old, living in London, Ontario, Canada. I wanted to be a documentary filmmaker. And someone had told me about what they said there's this cult in New York called Scientology, which I'd never heard of. And if you give them all your money, they'll make anything possible in your life. And about 6 months later, I was walking down the street. This guy was there selling books. Then I realized they were all the same book, Dianetics, which again I'd never heard of. He handed me one and asked me to look at it. I was talking, I wasn't really listening to him. As I opened the cover and it said, stamped on the inside page, said Church of Scientology. And I said, take me there.
All right.
All right, here we go.
I'm not a great multitasker, you know, and if I feel like doing something, that's what I do. And I was into this shit, and I was becoming an auditor. Like, I was in Scientology probably 4 months, and I had done more than John Travolta had done, and he'd been there for 85 years or some shit. My agents call, you know, you got an audition, fuck it, I don't really, you know what I mean? I've always on about a spiritual adventure, and this was like, whoa, this is an interesting road, you know? So, what was the question?
So tell me, how was it you first got involved in Scientology?
Well, I was introduced to it by some friends. I don't know if they said it or if it was just talked about by others that they had superpowers. And I was like really young, but I thought I'd like to have superpowers. But also I had done so much political social work. So this really looked like it was a solution to handling a lot of the world's problems. Instead of trying to handle things en masse, you could deal with it person by person, make each person better, and thus the world would get better in short order.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome to our whole new world. It's a world where the operative phrase reads, exceeding all expectations, transcending all parameters, extending the boundaries beyond any boundary, not to mention Godspeed, lightning speed, and a quantum leap in sheer rapidity of progress up the bridge. We're out to make every life extraordinary. And if by chance it ever seems laborious or a sacrifice, then you are looking at the off-ramps instead of the highway. You are missing the signpost up ahead, the one that reads, next stop, infinity.
Probably my favorite concept of Scientology is a world without criminality, a world without war, and a world without insanity. And I know of no other group that their goals are that clear. Look, I don't. You name me another philosophy, religion, or technology that one of its main goals, besides the three I mentioned earlier, where joy is the operative concept.
These are the times now, people. Okay? These are the times we will all remember. Were you there? What did you do? So what do you say? We're going to clean this place up? Huh? Okay. Because we're counting on you. Okay? All right? To LRH.
Scientology is such a subject of fascination for people. How did you get engaged in the story?
Well, I've always been interested in religions and why people believe one idea rather than another. I've studied Jonestown, radical Islam. They're oftentimes good-hearted people, idealistic, but full of a kind of crushing certainty that eliminates doubt. You know, my goal wasn't to write an expose. It was simply to understand Scientology, trying to understand what people get out of it. You know, why do they go into it in the first place? I was interested in intelligent and skeptical people who are drawn into a belief system and wind up acting on those beliefs in ways they never thought they would.
The Church of Scientology turned out to be 2 offices above a Woolworth store. He asked me, "What's ruining your life?" I said, "I'm in love. I'm in love with this woman. It's impossible. I don't know what to do. I need some help." And he said, "We can help you with that." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yes." And I ran home and got her. And I said, "We have to sign up for this. It sounds really good. It could, save our relationship." So we both signed up the next day to do a course, which I think cost $50. The thing that absolutely got me and stayed with me forever was the very first thing I read when you opened the course back, and it said, paraphrasing, "Don't believe any of this. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, discard it." I was troubled by the fact they called it a religion, but I figured, it's some tax scam. It's fine with me. As long I don't really care about that as long as it works.
The first exercise after you do all this reading and stuff like that is this thing called OTTR0, which is basically you sit just like this, eyes closed, 3 feet away from somebody who's doing the same thing, and you basically confront them, And in Scientology lingo, I went exterior. Exteriorizing is what they call it. You leave your body. So it was a transcendent experience for me. And that made me go, holy fucking shit, this is, wow.
I was reading books and going to lectures and going to things at the different events at the mission, at the local Santa Clara mission. And then I knew I wanted to join the Sea Org and get really involved as soon as I could, which would be right out of high school. Sea Org is the most fraternal order of the organization. It's people who really, really believe in the cause and sign a billionaire contract, which I did when I was, as soon as I could. I left skid marks getting into that billionaire contract. You thought you were doing something good to have a positive effect on all of mankind. That's what Hubbard says. Everything you do for endless trillions of years depends on what you do here and now with and in Scientology.
I began to ask this question, what is man? And I found, oddly enough, that nobody could tell me what man was. What did he consist of? Where was he going? What was he doing? To really know life, you've got to be part of life. You must get down and look. You must get into the nooks and crannies of existence. You have to rub elbows with all kinds and types of men before you can finally establish what he is.
And you, in fact, did this?
Yes, I've slept with bandits in Mongolia, and I've hunted with pygmies in the Philippines. As a matter of fact, I have studied 21 different primitive races, including the white race. And my conclusions were that man, he was a spiritual being that was pulled down to the material, the fleshly interests, to an interplay in life that was, in fact, too great for him to confront. And I concluded finally that he needed a hand.
To understand Scientology, you have to understand the life and mind of its inventor, L. Ron Hubbard. Hubbard was a prolific writer. He actually holds the Guinness Book of World Records for the number of books published, more than 1,000. Hubbard got his start in the Depression, writing pulp fiction, named for the cheap paper used. Writers were paid a penny a word, so they had to write a lot to make money. Hubbard hammered away so fast on long rolls of butcher paper that he used to drip sweat on his typewriter. Hubbard's career took off when he began to write for a magazine called Astounding Science Fiction. Along with authors like Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein, Hubbard wrote stories with a sense of mission to get man to the stars.
He found his true métier in science fiction. And a lot of what Scientology is, he had previously written about in the form of his science fiction. He had the ability to fabricate these amazing tales, and he transported those imaginary stories into his theology.
After Pearl Harbor, Hubbard took command of a subchaser, but he was still a man prone to invention. He would write that he sunk 2 Japanese subs, but in fact, just off the coast of Oregon, he opened fire on what turned out to be a log and dropped most of his depth charges on underwater magnetic rocks. When he accidentally shelled a Mexican island, he was relieved of his command. After the war, Hubbard ended up in Los Angeles, where he settled in with a small group of seekers and visionaries.
A guy named Jack Parsons, a fascinating man, was one of the founders of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And there's actually a crater on the moon named after Jack. He was a significant scientific figure, but he was also the head honcho in this black magic cult. It was called the OTO, or the Ordo Templi Orientis. They followed the teachings of Aleister Crowley, a famous sexual magic figure in England. Parsons had a mansion in Pasadena. They would have ceremonies, and they were seeking some sort of goddess figure that he could impregnate in order to create the Antichrist. Hubbard moved in and became Parsons' assistant. One night, this beautiful redhead named Marjorie Cameron showed up at the door. She was perfectly willing to engage in this sexual ritual in order, supposedly, to produce the Antichrist. She and Jack eventually got married. That happened after Hubbard ran off with Jack's girlfriend, Sarah Northrup.
Scientology and Hubbard would later refuse to acknowledge his relationship with Sarah, but we uncovered Sarah's own recollections of her time with Hubbard.
He was 13 years older than I was. I thought he was a great war hero, a captain of a ship that had been downed in the Pacific, and he was weeks on a raft, and he'd been blinded by the sun, and his back had been broken. All these things were complete lies, but I didn't know it at the time. I believed every word of it.
If only Sarah had seen Hubbard's military records. In a 900-page file, Hubbard's activities are laid out in extraordinary detail. Hubbard told people that he had been blinded and crippled during the war, and that practices that would form the basis of Scientology had cured him. But his records show that his only wounds were mild arthritis and conjunctivitis.
We had this terrible fight, and he told me he was going to commit suicide if I didn't marry him. I really believed him, so we got married. We spent the winter in that lighthouse on the lake in the Poconos. I remember one awful night when I was asleep and he was out typing, and he hit me across the side of the head with a .45 because I was smiling in my sleep, and he said I was thinking about somebody else. I got up and left the house and walked on the ice of the lake. I was terrified. He always said that he would kill me rather than let me leave him. The only good thing I got from Ron was my baby. We moved to Elizabeth, New Jersey, and he started writing Dianetics. The book was conceived, and he started working on it in 1950. He said many times that the only way to make any real money was to have a religion. That's essentially what he was trying to do with Dianetics. Get a religion where he could have an income, and the government wouldn't take it away from him in the form of taxes.
Dianetics was an immense success. From the moment it was published in 1950, it swept through America and other countries around the world.
This book, that's the background of all of this. That's what started all the trouble. And we expected this to sell about 6,000 copies, and it hit the top of the bestseller list of the New York Times, and it just stayed there month in, month out. It was like I started an avalanche.
Dianetics, the modern science of mental health, is considered to be the fundamental text which is the foundation upon which all else is built. One of the theories of Dianetics is to discover these things that are very traumatic or have been very upsetting to you, and if you can observe exactly what happened, the power of that incident to influence you today is removed.
The concept of Dianetics is that you have two sides of your mind. There is the analytical side, which is a perfect computer. It remembers everything. It's flawless. It never makes a mistake. And then there's the reactive side. And this is where all your neuroses and anxieties and fears are stored. And where do they come from? They come from engrams. An engram is like a memory.
Man has an automobile accident. He has a picture of an automobile accident. He has all the sensations of having been hurt in the automobile accident. It takes him a long time to recover because he's still wearing the automobile accident. If you said, hey, why don't you take this automobile accident and throw it away? Why, all of a sudden he recovers from the automobile accident, naturally, because the thing is keeping it impressed upon him and his body is his mind. An auditor is a practitioner in Scientology. He listens and he computes. We have a meter, and a meter simply shows where an individual is aberrated.
The e-meter is a very powerful instrument. It's 1/3 of a lie detector. A lie detector would also measure your respiration and pulse. It's 2 cans, and there's electrical wires carrying an indetectable amount of current into a meter with a needle on it. According to Church of Scientology, it actually detects the mass of your thoughts, although there's no evidence that thoughts have mass.
The current passes through your body, and as your mental mass increases, so does the resistance to the circuit. So, the auditor will ask you a question. Tell me about an upset with your mother.
What's truly bothering you about being with, about your wife's behavior? What is it?
Why are you upset today? Well, I had a fight with my wife. Well, I can see.
That there. Was that the same thought?
Say that again, and gradually the needle will have less response. And in that manner, you discharge the emotion. Then you're asked to go back to earlier incidents that were like that. And you might say, well, my mother spoke to me in the same scolding tone of voice. And you recount that story. And eventually you discharge the emotion. And that's very much like Freudian therapy. But with Scientology, then they'll ask further, well, that's as far back as I go. Well, maybe not. The auditor might say, something just registered on the meter. What was that? I had an image in my mind. Well, what was the image? It was a barn. Are you inside the barn? Go back to that image. Okay, open the door. What do you see? Well, it looks like 19th century France. You walk outside and you see the people dressed in their costumes, and the e-meter is saying this is real. This is a real memory. It's just as real as those other memories that you had.
Beautiful little soft needle and everything's good. Needle's rising, which means he's getting, thinking a lot. Needle just like goes, like a lot of shit blows away. The theta bop, which is a very quick little thing like, which means exteriorization.
When you come out of an auditing session, you feel euphoric.
That confessional nature makes you feel better.
Somebody would say, "Oh, you're going to have a session." I would feel better just hearing that.
Man is asleep. He is hypnotized. Now, in Scientology, reverse the process, and you make him wake up. Such a man becomes unbrainwashed, you might say. He becomes unhypnotized.
This sounds, Mr. Hubbard, in a sense, like an extension of psychology or psychiatry.
Oh, no. Psychiatry has to do with the insane, and we have nothing to do with the insane whatsoever.
Is this a form of psychoanalysis?
No, psychoanalysis, they lay back. Don't associate Scientology with such people. That's terrible. That's bad manners,
When L. Ron Hubbard first wrote Dianetics, he thought it was a tremendous psychological breakthrough, so much so that he would be recognized. He wrote letters to the American Psychological Association. They couldn't make heads or tails of his ideas. To them, it was like psychological folk art. For instance, he would talk about clear.
That means that the individual has erased his reactive mind, his unconscious mind is gone, and he is totally alert and totally capable.
Once you've taken away all these traumatic memories from this life and previous ones, then you are clear.
Someone who had a perfect memory, who was never ill.
Your eyesight would be better.
They tested people before Scientology processing and after Scientology processing, uniformly found that their IQ had raised. We are making such individuals, and we're making them regularly, and we're making them routinely.
An overt act is an effort to individuate. It is a withhold of oneself.
Ron gave lectures everywhere for large amounts of money, and money just started pouring in. I mean, these people were paying $500 a piece in the 1950s for training in Dianetics. I felt that he was stealing from people and that he was hoodwinking them. All the business of sitting, holding hands, and putting all these false memories into people's minds. Then they would finally come along and say, "Oh, yes, I can remember it all." We were surrounded by sycophants. He began to believe that he was a savior and a hero, that he really was this God figure. He was absolutely convinced that he had the cure for the psychological ills of mankind, and that the only reason that it wasn't being promulgated far and wide was that the medical profession had a vested interest in keeping people sick. I think he was afraid that some psychiatrist would pop him into an institution. He degenerated into a really paranoid, terrifying person.
Sarah threatened to leave Hubbard unless he got psychiatric help. He responded by kidnapping their baby and taking her to Cuba.
He was incapable of taking care of her, so he put her in the charge of a mother and daughter who were both mentally retarded, and they apparently kept her in some kind of cage.
He called me and told me that he had killed her. He said he had cut her into little pieces and dropped the pieces in a river, and it was my fault. Then he'd call me back and say that she was still alive. And this went on and on and on.
When Hubbard came back to the U.S., Sarah persuaded him to agree to a divorce and give her custody of their daughter.
When I left him, he cleaned out all the joint bank accounts so that I wouldn't have any money.
Hubbard soon lost all his money, too. Dianetics proved to be a passing fad, like the hula hoop. But Hubbard still had his imagination. So he repackaged the ideas of Dianetics into a religion called Scientology.
I shall ask you for an IRC break.
Hubbard added more science and more structure. Along with the e-meters came a payment plan. Every step to clear had a price tag.
How would you describe their business model?
Rapacious. It's all about making money. Hubbard, from the beginning, knew that people would pay for this counseling at a pretty good clip. And so he continued to come out with more and more levels. The real money was in paying for these higher and higher courses. They were getting into thousands of dollars. Those prices kept going up and up. That's really where Scientology begins to create this indoctrination. It's Hubbard that came up with that, only Hubbard, and you have to be a part of our group to get that spiritual satisfaction you were looking for.
The Hubbard College of Scientology, Qualifications Division, Department of Certifications and Awards, does hereby certify that Anthony A. Phillips has attained the state of clear.
As more members paid for Hubbard's bridge to total freedom, the church's coffers swelled with hundreds of millions of dollars. From the beginning, Hubbard tried to shelter that revenue from any government taxes.
The founding Church of Scientology attempted in 1967 to get a court determination that it was exempt from federal taxation on the basis that it was a non-profit religious organization. A federal court denied the founding church tax exemption, saying that some of the church's earnings from 1955 to 1959 were used for the personal benefit of private individuals, L. Ron Hubbard and family. ABC News has repeatedly requested interviews with Mr. Hubbard. We have been told that he is unavailable.
It was very exciting. It was that heady mix of emotion and belief. And you get stuck to it. It's so strong that it sticks you like glue, and there's no way you can get away from it. I was deeply convinced that we were going to save the world. I considered myself tremendously fortunate to be in that position. Out of the blue, one day I received this envelope with an invitation to join the Sea Project. It was completely confidential. I wasn't to tell anyone about it. And I was so ecstatic. Here was a chance to work with Hubbard. And I signed yes. I was on my way to the greatest adventure in my life. We had an overnight flight to Las Palmas in the Canary Islands, where we found at about 6 o'clock in the morning, we were taxied down to a dock. We had to climb up this rickety ladder all the way up to the ship, and we couldn't believe this was where we were going. This ship was a rusty hulk. I was given a dirty old jumpsuit to get into, missing one arm, and the other one was almost half torn off, and put to work. We had to scrub the ship and clean out the ship, which was arduous, strenuous work in the heat. Hubbard came to the ship every day, smoking cigarettes and surveying his kingdom. After dinner, he'd come and join us on the well deck. There he was, right amongst us, talking to us. He would be his most magnificent self at those times. He'd lean back and he'd look up at the cosmos, and he'd point out galaxies and constellations, and he'd say, the fifth invaders are up there, and this is how they're dressed, and this is how they talk. And see that blip across the sky over there? He'd point it out, and we were all, yes, we see it, we see it. And he'd say, and that's one of their space vessels.
And there was the fourth invader force was here. The fifth invader force came in, and the name of this solar system is Space Station 33. The fourth invader force had been there for God knows how many skillion years, have been sitting down.
And we'd sit there spellbound. You could hear a pin drop on that ship. He had us emotionally captured and held right there in the palm of his hand where he wanted us. He had us right there.
In the early 60s, Hubbard was under investigation in various countries. His solution was to take to the high seas. He made himself commodore of a fleet of 3 ships, a Scientology navy. To crew the vessels, he created the Sea Organization. The members of this so-called Sea Org would become the church's clergy.
They began going from port to port in the Mediterranean, show up for a few days and then go off, sail off in some other direction. And a very enterprising reporter for Granada Television in Britain tracked him down.
Slate 1, take 1.
That's one of the very few instances where Hubbard has actually appeared on camera.
What are you actually doing on this ship now?
I am studying ancient civilizations, trying to find what happened to them, finding out why they went into a decline, why they died.
Hubbard believed that he had lived various lives in the Mediterranean area, as a Phoenician prince, as an Italian prince.
As a matter of fact, it's quite interesting that exercises can be conducted which demonstrate conclusively that there are memories which exist prior to this life.
He had buried treasure all around the coastline, and he wanted to go find all these caches of treasure. We were all very heated, very excited about this. Whatever was his whim, we did. We would have died for the old man.
Don't you wake up sometimes in the middle of the night and think to yourself, well, I've been on this ship with a whole lot of Scientologists who believe I'm fantastic?
They don't believe I'm fantastic. If you saw the number of times they don't follow my orders.
LRH started to devise a system of penalties or punishments, or what he called ethics. And one of the penalties for the auditors making mistakes in their auditing sessions was to be tossed overboard. You have done such and such and such and such, and we commit your errors to the deep, and then just pushed overboard. 30 feet, 35 feet.
This is very definitely off the record, and don't use it. But Scientology organizations were probably much more precisely conducted when I was a director of them. I haven't been a director of them sometimes. So maybe there are abuses. I wouldn't tell anybody else that.
Do you ever think that you might be quite mad?
Oh, yes. The one man in the world who never believes he's mad is a madman. So we got married a year and a half after we joined and moved to California. I wanted to be a writer, and my wife, she was studying Scientology. We had a baby right away, and the only people we knew there were Scientologists. I was working as a furniture mover during the day and writing spec scripts at night. And then on the weekends, I'd be, doing some auditing.
Can you recall a time when you were happy?
There was a social aspect to it, too. You got to hang out with people. There's some interesting people, nice people. These are all people who are looking to improve their life.
I tripped on a cloud and fell 8 miles high. I tore my mind on a jagged sky. I just dropped in to see what condition my condition was in. Oh yeah, what condition my condition was in.
While Hubbard was hiding from public view, he was very active in directing the operations of the church, particularly in Hollywood.
This was just after the Haight-Ashbury era. And what Scientology was selling itself is get high without drugs. It was a place where people went and explored ideas, and you would often see famous people. Leonard Cohen, members of the Grateful Dead, Rock Hudson. So they purchased the Celebrity Center. The idea was to draw in these famous entertainers and use them as pitchmen for the religion.
In an industry like Hollywood, where stardom is such an elusive quality, Scientology would offer a route to maybe feel a little bit more secure. And when you're trying to break in, you're also dealing with relentless rejection and something that helps you stay focused and feel that you're improving yourself and becoming more clear. You can see the appeal of that.
The beliefs and practices that I have studied in Scientology have been invaluable to me.
Have you ever met Ron Hubbard?
I'd love to. I'd be honored because I think he's so brilliant.
So when I worked at the Celebrity Center, I would, just recruit various people like Priscilla Presley and, of course, John Travolta. Johnny, he came and he started on course, and he was so fun and outrageous, and he just made it a party wherever he was.
John Travolta was a young actor in his very first movie. He was a troubled young man, and he was looking for help. A fellow actor gave him a little bit of Scientology counseling. She gave him a copy of Dianetics, and he was transported by this.
He would go on these auditions, and no matter what he went out for, he'd get it.
I am stuck on Band-Aid.
A Band-Aid commercial. Right away, he booked that.
Now the Army starts you at 2.
He was booking everything, and then he went up for a series. Of course, he books it, and it's a big series, Welcome Back Kotter.
Up your nose with a rubber hose. Welcome back.
In the late 70s and early 80s, John Travolta was Scientology's biggest star. Spanky was assigned to be Travolta's key contact with the church, and she helped out with producers, fans, and the press. They became close, and when Spanky got married, Travolta was there.
When Johnny first got into Scientology, he didn't even believe in himself that much, but he got injected with a lot of confidence, and then you get this phobia inducement that if I leave, it's all going to go down the tubes. When you're in the organization, all the good that happens to you is because of Scientology, and everything that isn't good is your fault.
They sell it all in the beginning as something quite logical. Everything makes sense. And you're going up what they call the bridge, and you're doing this auditing, and this is good. And the next one, well, it's not quite as good. It didn't quite make sense to you, but you've already paid for the next one, so you'll do that one.
The bridge, it's a metaphor. You start here at the bottom of the bridge, and then you go to the top. So where it is, and it's an awareness scale. You start down here and you're not aware of anything, and then you go up here and you're a lot more aware of who you are, your spirituality, your relationship to others. A person is supposed to become more able as they go up the bridge. And then there are the OT levels, operating Thetan. And a Thetan is a spiritual being. That's the soul of the person.
And what level over time did you achieve?
OT 8. That's the highest there is. You can't get any higher than OT 8.
From the beginning, you hear these stories people tell of these abilities they've been able to gain.
It was always talked about the people who were OT could read your mind, and they could move objects at will, and they could, they were cause over matter, energy, space, and time. So it sounded damn good to me. I mean, I thought, wow, this is great.
I finally get to OT3, and they give me the secret materials, which you've been hearing about all this time. They're handwritten by Hubbard. You have to keep them in a locked briefcase. Be very cautious, because they've always said if this gets out, it's dangerous to people. It can actually do them harm if they are not adequately prepared. And I read it. And it doesn't make any sense.
This garbled story that didn't make sense.
I remember for one fleeting second thinking, well, maybe it's an insanity test. Maybe if you believe this, they kick you out. Maybe that's it. That, of course, is not the case. They talk about, the fact that the Earth was created and such trillions of years ago, and this guy, space guy.
Galactic overlord. This was the prison planet, and people being caught and captured and being brought to planet Earth.
And put them in volcanoes and then blow them up with A-bombs.
Whoa. I studied geography in school. Those volcanoes didn't exist 75 million years ago.
And we have these lost souls all over us, and we have to get rid of them. And I'm going, what? The fuck are you talking about? I'm down for the self-help stuff. I'm down for, okay, I can be clear. I can get rid of the negative emotions. But what the fuck is this?
When you get to the upper levels of Scientology, the creation myth is explained to you. The story is that 75 million years ago, people lived in a world very much like the world of America in the 1950s.
People at that particular time and space were walking around in clothes which looked very remarkably like the clothes they wear at this very minute. And the cars they drove looked exactly the same. And they walked down streets that looked like these streets.
It was a very similar world and similar problems, one of which was overpopulation.
They had elected a fellow by the name of Xenu to the supreme ruler.
There was a tyrannical overlord of the Galactic Confederacy named Xenu. In order to resolve this problem of overpopulation, he called people in, ostensibly for tax audits, and had them frozen with injections of glycol to their heart.
Boxed them up in boxes, threw them into space planes. DC-8 airplane is the exact copy of the space plane of that day.
They were flown to the prison planet, Tijiak. It's actually the planet Earth. And these frozen bodies were then dropped into volcanoes.
And then they set off hydrogen bombs on the top of each volcano.
And their disembodied spirits, these are called thetans, floated out, and they were captured and forced to sit in front of movie screens.
With a 3D super colossal motion picture.
They were shown images, implants, as Hubbard would have it.
Every man is shown crucified. So is the psychiatrist shown crucified. That's how he gets away with what he gets away with. He electric shocks people.
And when a child is born, a thetan will leap inside the child's body at that very instant, and it becomes like the child's soul. More than one thetan might crowd into the body. Hundreds or thousands might. They're the source of all of our neuroses and fears and anxieties. Then you are on the E-meter by yourself now. You're soloing. You're supposed to scan mentally from your top of your head to your toes to see if you can locate any alien beings. And when you do, you tell them to go away.
I kept on trying to audit. I could not figure out how I could have all these spirits of dead people attached to me, inside me, on me. I was clear. For God's sake, I was clear.
People actually have breakdowns, nervous breakdowns, because they spend so much time thinking about being infested by these creatures. If you're really believing that, it can drive you crazy.
Those years of introspection eventually led me to sincerely considering that I was so bad that I couldn't confront how bad I was. I didn't know it at the time, but a depression set in that was with me for years. And the worst thing was that LRH kept ordering me to more auditing. I had to find swords that were stuck in me, hypothetical swords, imaginary swords that were causing all this pain. This auditing went on and on, wasn't doing any good. I should have been left alone. But everything that I took offense with, I rationalized almost immediately. I had to. I could not continue in this game of Scientology without explaining away what he was doing. It got to be a way of believing, and every one of us got into that. It was part of the mind control. It was part of the cultic manipulation. He was the master who did it to us, and we took it on, and then we did it to ourselves. And I learned from it that I would never, ever again, go do the bidding of a tyrant.
Hubbard questioned his own sanity and actually wrote a letter to the Veterans Administration asking for psychiatric help that he seems never to have been given. I think that his whole creation of Scientology really was a form of self-therapy. If he was just a fraud, then at some point he would have taken the money and run, but he never did that. He spent much of his day on the e-meter trying to understand what was going on inside his own mind.
Hubbard became increasingly paranoid that a powerful Thetan had infected his body and that regular auditing wasn't strong enough to make it leave. When Larry Wright was researching his book, he videotaped an interview with a Scientologist who was asked to help Hubbard expel the Thetan.
He was having problems getting rid of a BT, body Thetan. So he wanted me to build a machine and basically blow the Thetan away. Just get him out of there, blow him out. And also kill the body.
It was a suicide mission.
Basically, yeah. But I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted to scare him. So I had read some books about Nikola Tesla and stuff, and I figured maybe building a Tesla coil would probably be the best route to go. I had little electrodes that you hook it up to the e-meter, so when he's on the cans, then he would just flip the button and it would do its thing.
So did he try it?
As far as I know, he blew up my e-meter. Burn it up.
Scientology really is a journey into the mind of L. Ron Hubbard. And the further you get into it, the more like L. Ron Hubbard you become.
In 1980, LRH moved off the lines so that he could continue his writings and researches without any distractions. He has now moved on to his next level of OT research. This level is beyond anything any one of us ever imagined. This level is in fact done in an exterior state, meaning that it is done completely exterior from the body. At this level of OT, the body is nothing more than an impediment and encumbrance to any further gain as an OT. Thus, at 2,000 hours Friday, the 24th of January, AD 36, L. Ron Hubbard discarded the body he had used in this lifetime for 74 years, 10 months, and 11 days. Although you may feel grief, understand that he did not and does not now.
Hubbard died of a stroke in 1986, but he left no plan for succession. The ambitious David Miscavige stepped forward, and by bending arms and making deals, took control of the church and installed a new generation of lieutenants.
We want to make sure that all of us end cycle on this completely so we can get on with the job that is ahead of us.
The first time I met Miscavige was in '83. He was a guy running back and forth between Hubbard and the property in Hemet in a van, back and forth delivering messages. Worked my way through the organization, and Miscavige would come down to Florida where I was running the place, and we slowly but surely became friends. By 2001, I was working directly for Miscavige. We'd sit and drink a bottle of scotch, and I'd hear everything he had to say about the church and about the people involved from his perspective. And honestly, it was horrifying. It was scary. In Scientology, there was a concept that 98% of the people are good and 2% are evil. Well, he worked very hard to convince me that it was the other way around. 2.5% were okay, and the rest were very evil and bad, and somehow they'd all been dumped on that base so they could be around him. He was extremely paranoid.
So, Marty, is Miscavige a true believer?
Yes.
He has to continue to believe, because if he looks at it rationally and he sees that it is as I say, it will destroy him. He'll realize that, because he's done a lot worse than I've done. He's abused people on a personal level. It's how he got to the top, and it's how he stayed at the top.
At the age of 11, David Miscavige joined the church with his parents. As a child, his ambition caught Hubbard's eye. So when Hubbard wanted to become a filmmaker, Miscavige was his assistant cameraman. An auditing prodigy, he claimed Scientology cured his asthma. He became a sort of general contractor for the church and was soon named Action Chief, the man who did whatever needed doing for a church that developed a scary reputation for attacking its critics.
Scientology has been in the headlines off and on for 25 years now, almost since the time it was founded as a religion. Scientology's story is one of a church embittered by what it perceives as harassment.
We're talking about attacks from multi-billion-dollar media conglomerates, world governments, real powers of the world.
They take enemies very seriously.
This comes right out of Hubbard's own policies from the 60s. He's saying we never defend, we always attack. And they have followed it ever since. They call it fair game. And anybody who criticizes Scientology is fair game.
Whatever you're told, whatever needs to be done, if it's against the law, it doesn't matter.
The best example was in the mid-70s, Scientologists were walking into these Department of Justice offices and IRS offices and taking documents out by the yard. The FBI raided the Church of Scientology, the largest raid in FBI history at that time.
Oh my God, the building is filled with FBI and they're taking things. It was craziness.
Clearly L. Ron Hubbard was in charge of all of that, but he was only named an unindicted co-conspirator. And Mary Sue Hubbard, Hubbard's wife, she went to prison, 10 others went to prison.
This was where I cut my teeth. I was in my early 20s. Miscavige was in his early 20s. We were taking over for this group that had created the largest domestic espionage operation in the history of the United States.
They were breaking into offices, framing people. This is the activities of a church?
There was a guy who, was a reporter for the LA Times whose dog was poisoned while he was working on the Scientology story.
Again and again, while reporting this story, we met many former members who described Scientology as a dangerous and deeply paranoid organization.
They hire private detectives to harass people.
I have been sued twice.
Financial ruin.
Years of harassment.
Their homes broken into, have them beaten.
We chased her around. We followed her to the airport.
Gotten hold of personal phone records.
Slashed their tires, break their car windows.
I was locked in a chicken wire cage.
Dangerous, horrifying, terrifying fraud. A nightmare.
Many of their stories are corroborated in sworn court testimony by up to a dozen other people. Are they all lying?
They sat in a room. They figured out what they were going to say.
My position as the spokesperson was to evade the question or sleaze around some way or give what was an acceptable answer or something that I believed at the time.
Please welcome Mr. Mike Rainier.
Because Scientology is perceived and conceived by Scientologists as being the salvation for mankind, you can have people that lie with a very straight face if they believe that what they are doing is protecting the Church of Scientology.
L. Ron Hubbard says, we do not find critics of Scientology who do not have criminal pasts. Do you believe that?
Sure.
People who oppose you are undoubtedly criminals?
I believe that, yeah. You know, there isn't and hasn't been any effort which has been taken to, quote, silence critics.
No, that doesn't happen. Oh, we would never do that.
But according to many insiders, Hubbard was growing more and more vindictive toward those who stood in his way. He created what he called the Rehabilitation Project Force.
The RPF was what we called it. It was the prison camp where you'd go for reindoctrination.
It was on the 7th floor of the Hollywood headquarters, a confined space to rehabilitate members who might be harboring subversive thoughts. Spanky was sent to the RPF when she objected to the way the church had denied medical treatment to her boss.
I went thinking, of course, this is a big mistake. And then I got there, and there were like 200 of us. So much of the exec strata of the organization that hit the skid simultaneously.
RPF stands for Rehabilitation Project Force. It is a program that is exclusively for the benefit of C organization members. If they are stressed out, if they're not doing well on their job, have them do menial type work and 5 hours a day of auditing and Scientology training. It's a fabulous program.
We were working, cross my heart, 30 hours on, 3 hours off, doing like hard labor, like having wire brushes on windowsills and sanding, breathing paint fumes. That regular crew would eat first, and then we'd get what was left. It was kind of like table scraps. There was mattresses out there on the roof, and they were wet and soggy and gross. And if you got to sleep for 3 hours, sometimes you just had to go out there and crash out. And I had a young child at that time who was 10 months old when I went to the RPF. She got taken and put in the cadet org, the organization for the children. And then I got pregnant when I was in the RPF. So now I'm sanding walls and eating table scraps and pregnant and worrying myself sick about my child.
In Spanky's time, the children of Sea Org members were separated from their parents and raised in the cadet org to remove all distractions from their parents' ultimate responsibility, to clear the planet. Sea Org members were often pressured to have abortions because the church viewed getting children as an unpractical burden.
Initially, you're like, this is absurd, this is nuts. And then you kind of settle in and go, well, obviously, I need to deal with something that I'm not facing. So perhaps they're doing this to make me better. There's so many bizarre stories that just hard to believe stuff. They asked if I could arrange a private screening of Saturday Night Fever. And I was like, what? I disappeared from this man's life. I abandoned him, and now you want me to arrange a private screening? What do you... I said, is there anything else? Maybe a Beatles reunion.
Travolta had been wondering where Spanky was. When she was sent to the RPF, she was not allowed to contact him or anyone else. But now, under the watch of a guard, she was permitted to call Travolta's assistant.
She said we could use John's personal print of the film under one condition, that you'll see John. I was so excited. I hadn't had dialogue with him for many months. We had the screening of the film, and on the next night I was supposed to have dinner with Johnny. And after the screening, I was abruptly told I wasn't going to see him and I needed to call and cancel. He was truly angry at me for having allowed this abuse of myself, and for having that so little of myself, that I would allow this degree of degradation, and he was my good friend, and I knew that he was telling me the truth. Those words were such a wake-up call for me, and I went over there to the cadet org. There were so many sick children in there, and my daughter was very, very ill, burning up with fever, completely neglected, in a urine-soaked crib. Her eyes were so filled with mucus, they were welded shut. She had fruit flies on her body, and I couldn't bear it. I just went, no, I'm done. I mean, I just knew I could make these choices for me. I could decide to give up my life and do this to help the world, but I couldn't make these choices for my children. I just had to get her out.